Grove from Pretoria. Is everything all right? People talk, say things.
Hello?
Why didn't you tell me it was out of order? I suppose you think that's funny.
I'm not allowed out the front door.
Who says you weren't?
Them.
Who?
Them.
It was terrible out there. I could hear breathing.
We told you.
Are you worried about the man?
They hate us. That's the truth. They want to kill and torture every one of us. You can see it in their eyes.
Come now, Frederick. Do you dream about unholy things?
I really don't like what's going on here. There's something wrong, and that's a fact.
Wait. What did you dream last night? This manifestation of evil. You must be delivered from evil.
Kid, mind if I take a swig of milk?
Knock yourself out.
Ulcers. All I do these days is drink fucking milk.
My heart bleeds.
Yeah, well, so do my ulcers, you punk bastard. What the goddamn hell's this about? There's easier ways to commit suicide, you
There's
know.
a dead man downstairs who found a harder way.
Louis? If you killed Louis, so help me.
Campagna's okay. He'll have a headache to make a hangover seem like Christmas, but he's okay. Fatso, too.
Then who?
A blonde guy, I don't know his name, but I've seen him around.
Have you?
Last time was at Bayfront Park when you sent him to help kill Cermak. Time before that, I saw him running down Randolph Street when Capone sent him to kill Jake Lingle. And tonight, you sent him to kill Nate Heller. But he didn't quite get the job done, did he?
You're wrong on that last count, kid. Dead wrong.
Then you sent that son of a bitch to Florida just to catch some sun?
I didn't say I didn't send him to Florida. What I do say is I didn't send him to kill you.
He pushed me off a skyride tower tonight, Frank. And you know I really don't like heights. I should be a twisted sack of bones and meat on a morgue tray about now, but somehow I'm not. I'm here. He's dead, and so are you. So are you, Nitty. I wish to Christ Lang had killed you that afternoon. I wish to Christ I didn't make them call an ambulance for you.
Heller, I didn't send him. I didn't even know the bastard was in town. He doesn't work for me.
He doesn't work for anybody now.
Something you aren't at all aware of. Why am I not already dead?
The silenced automatic in my hand raised to aim itself at his forehead.
You are dead. Fuck you.
Wait, just wait. Lower that goddamn thing, will you? Just hear me out. I didn't say he never done work for me. He's a guy Johnny Torrio recommended to Al back on the Lingle deal. I used him later myself. Used him now and then on ticklish matters.
Oh, is that what I am? A ticklish matter?
Kid, I know how you feel. I know the kind of emotions you got running wild in you. I know all there is to know about revenge. You could ask 10% Tony if he wasn't in hell. But I didn't hire a contract on you. I swear by all that's holy.
And I'm supposed to believe that because of all the Catholic shit on the walls? Who sent him then, Frank?
I don't know the answer to that. Not for sure. But I can figure it out, and so can you, if you try.
I was getting confused, starting to wonder what the hell I was doing.
Although edited for television, tonight's thriller contains scenes of suspense and violence which may be unsuitable for young viewers. Parental discretion is advised.
Observations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination and the maybe never to be defined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, moi, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I'm, of course, Rob casting from the Rob Observatory at you imagination connoisseurs, you members of what make up the Post-Geek singularity. That's right, you're all imagination connoisseurs. This is Rob Observations episode 1042. I got some banger letters, too. And I've got some comments. Comments in the comments section of the last show. First of these, I love comments. Good, bad, and different, comments are comments. Anybody who takes the time to express themselves after watching some of the show, I love that. I think it's amazing that people do. And you have to understand that when you're on the internet, people are going to talk about you. They're, like I said, I came up with this on the fly, but people seem to like it. Like I said, I am not everyone's jar of jam. And, I have to understand that. And when you go online and you espouse a point of view or something, people are either going to come, they're going to like you or not. And if they don't like you, they'll come after you and tell you, which is, in a way, kind of good. The anonymity allows people to be honest, and they can talk mad shit about you. So, I can promise you I try and be as open and honest as I can be on this show. However, that brings me to a few comments I wanted to address. One of them comes from Joe Garza 4869, dude. He posted this about a day ago, and this is what he writes. He writes, Rob, you are way too gatekeeper and elitist. People shouldn't have to do homework to appreciate good storytelling and pacing. Real people don't watch movies that way. Frankly, between you and Campia, Harloff, you guys are just not able to talk to regular moviegoers or people. You guys are just asshats. I'm just sick of you overanalyzing. Well, Joe, that's certainly a point of view. Here's the thing. When I began watching movies when I was like 5, I was interested in movies. Like, where did they come from? What are they about? Why are they this way? So I started reading books. I would ask to get books, yes, at 5. I mean, I didn't have very many, but as I grew older, I would get more. And I would see these things. I was very interested in them. When I started watching Star Trek, I found James Blish's novelization. There was Star Trek 1, Star Trek 2. Actually, the first book was just called Star Trek, and then it became Star Trek 1, where my dad would read to me out of these books, where James Blish had taken scripts and he novelized the scripts. He adapted the scripts into book form, into prose. And I loved those. And then, Stephen Whitfield's book, The Making of Star Trek, was hugely formative for me as a little kid. I mean, at first, it was over my head, but it had pictures. And then as I learned to read more and my reading comprehension expanded as I moved through elementary school, I was a voracious reader. But part of the reason I was reading so much is I wanted to read The Making of Star Trek, which is a big, thick, still to this day, one of the greatest books ever written on the making of a television show, not just Star Trek. But these are things that I read when I was a little kid. And it instilled in me a love of movies. Now, here's the thing. For you, watching movies as entertainment, not analyzing them at all, is fine. I've never said that you shouldn't be that way. For me, movies, and to a certain extent, call it cinematic storytelling, and I include television in this, but movie making as an art form, the 90-minute to 2.5-hour paradigm for most movies, was something, it was the art form of the 20th century. It took all the previous art forms and sort of combined them with the added benefit of technology into literally a new art form that did not exist. The feature film did not exist before the 20th century. So this was sort of an art form, and when I was interested in this, movies, sound films had been around for half a century. So you could get a grasp on the entirety of the history of this art form. So even as a little kid, movies were never just entertaining. And I would hope that if you watch this show, you understand that. I'm not here to be elitist or a gatekeeper. I'm here to explain and espouse my love of cinema and genre and storytelling in general as it's spilled out from movies into books, into comics, into albums, prog rock records, whatever your jam is. Peter and the Wolf, when I had it when I was a little kid. Power Records, 45s. I mean, that's what I'm here to do. Now, you don't, I don't expect you can watch movies however you want. But the thing is, this art form meant so much to me, and I've learned so much about the world. Not just, I mean, if you're interested in how movies are made, it leads to the creation of a brand new industry. Hollywood didn't exist. It was the immigrant experience. Jews came out to California and started the movie business. I mean, it was very much a Jewish business when it started. And then you had immigrant filmmakers like Fritz Lang, a German, who made one of the great science fiction movies in 1927, which was Metropolis, who fled Germany and became one of our great filmmakers in the mid-20th century. And there are many stories, and of course the stories of movie stars, the stories of writers, the people that were blacklisted during the Red Scare. People like Dalton Trumbo, who lost, he couldn't write anymore because they branded him a communist, or he people informed on their friends. Hollywood is the history of America in the 20th century. It's not the entire history, but it's certainly part of it. Many filmmakers went to war. Some actually went and fought. Actors went and fought in World War II. People like William Wyler went and made films about World War II. So Hollywood is not just, for me, it's never been just entertainment. And I'm not here gatekeeping, but what I am here trying to maybe encourage people to do is look into the art form. And hopefully you'll find something that you like or that will interest you. And if you just want to watch movies to enjoy them, that's fine too. But I would ask you, look, you called me an elitist. Pfft, guilty as charged. I am an elitist. I expect people to be good, to be better than they are. I expect people to seek things out. And it's okay. I'm not going to judge you because you want to sit down and just watch movies for entertainment. You probably know something about something that I know nothing about. I don't know a heck of a lot about sports. I mean, I know what I like, but I'm sure there's things you know about that I just don't know about because it's not my wheelhouse. I was obsessed with this thing in the beginning. But in terms of being an elitist, I would ask people, because I think what's happened is cinema and storytelling as an art form has been devalued in our culture. And I find that dismaying. And I do think that we are on the cusp of interactivity now that human beings can be at the center of their own entertainment, literally inserted into their own entertainment. The idea of a third party, and movies are basically third party entertainments, you're looking outside yourself, are going to go away. They are not going to endure. People will always like drama. Plays always exist. And, I'm sure maybe movies will always exist. But movies are very expensive to make. And I think that things change. Maybe movie making only had a run of 120, 130, 150 years maybe. And it'll be replaced, which is okay. But for me, and in my lifetime, movies were the shit. They were the thing. And in terms of people having to do their homework, all I would say is, the more you know about things, the more you will enjoy the world. The world around us is an amazing place, and it's full of wonder. I did a show about awe and wonder, and the more you know about it, the more you will appreciate the world. And my supposition and my baseline is that if I can bring some kind of knowledge or inspire you to go seek out your own knowledge, it will make you enjoy things more. For me, it has. Maybe that's not true for you, but for me, the more I know about how things are made, the more insight I have into them, the more I like them, the more I appreciate them. So anyway, I wanted to respond to that, and I appreciate you leaving the comment. That was really cool that you did leave a comment for me. And then there was someone else, 11 Evil X's. First of all, took me to task when I said, you're wrong when I was responding to other comments. And then he goes on to say, I agree with you. I don't think people should say you're wrong. And then I said, but the thing is, I'm not here to tell you whether you're right or wrong. And he took me to task for that. Look, when I said you're wrong, that was hopefully, clearly, obviously humor. But he went on to say, 11 Evil X's, that the funny thing is that I've never really understood Star Wars, and I'm too arrogant to listen and learn. Cut to, I'm doing a show where I'm literally reading yet someone else's words about Star Wars. And, it goes on, this conversation went on a little bit. And this person said, 11 Evil X's says, thanks, but I was born around the time you are. The problem is simply that you love to hear yourself talk way too much, Rob. You tell the same old stories about twice a week. Probably true, and it's getting a bit old, to be honest. And in all of your arrogant talk about Star Wars, I've never once heard you, cuts off, but I guess talk about the true meaning of Star Wars. I don't know, I've talked about Star Wars on literally hundreds of shows. And if I haven't touched on what you think Star Wars is about, maybe, I don't know. Stay tuned. Okay, I think I'm back. Okay, I think I'm back. Odd thing. Maybe it's my software. I have no idea. But if somebody wants to take me to task, hey, come on the show live. Come on the show live and we can have a discussion about it. You know, I always offer that to people if they want to do that. Come in and take me to task and tell me what you're thinking. Tell me I'm wrong. It's very odd. I don't know why it keeps doing that. I apologize. Now, we talked a little bit about this on Chris Gore's show, on the Versus show on Monday. But I wanted to talk about, before I get into Star Wars and absolutism, I wanted to talk about this article that was in The Hollywood Reporter that really pissed me off. But before I get to the article, I wanted to give you guys a little bit of film history, if I may. So film fans know that if you go to theaters to see film prints nowadays, because there aren't a lot of new film prints being struck. There's DCP, digital cinema packages being made of movies now, and most movies, unless you're going to the Vista Theater or the New Beverly that Quentin Tarantino owns, those theaters here in LA, there's not a lot of times where you can actually watch a print, and especially of older movies. And the problem with film prints, regular celluloid film prints, is they fade. They basically turn pink. The color goes away and they turn pink. And a lot of the film prints that exist, because they were loaned out, they're damaged. So I used to have a romance with wanting to see old movies projected. And when I was growing up, thanks to things like the Seattle International Film Festival, I don't know if it's still going on, it might be over, but the Seattle International Film Festival was great for that. They used to have a 70mm film festival every year at the Cinerama, where you'd stay up all night, and I got to see things like Lawrence of Arabia or Ben-Hur or West Side Story, beautiful 70mm prints. So when I was growing up, I went to a lot of revival screenings. I saw a lot of classic cinema on film prints. But nowadays, it's hard to see film prints. Now, there was a process that was invented. Actually, it was invented all the way back in 1915, but then it became popularized later, and it was called 3-strip Technicolor. And 3-strip Technicolor was popularized. They use it for a lot of Hollywood musicals. They used it for things like The Wizard of Oz. And 3-strip Technicolor, really, it's not used now anymore. But what it did was, it was a dye process. So the color doesn't fade. And I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of how 3-strip Technicolor worked. The 3-strip Technicolor process was a complex process for creating color motion pictures by simultaneously capturing the red, green, and blue components of an image onto 3 separate strips of black and white film. A specialized camera used a beam-splitting prism to divide the light from the scene, directing each color component to its respective film strip. The resulting 3 strips were then used to create a full-color image through a dye transfer process. So in the camera, the 3-strip Technicolor camera was a custom-designed device that held 3 rolls of black and white film simultaneously. Inside the camera, a beam-splitting prism was positioned behind the lens, and this prism divided the incoming light into 3 separate beams, one for green, one for red, and one for blue. The green light was directed to a black and white film strip. The red and blue light beams were directed to a bipack, 2 black and white film strips sandwiched together. The front film in the bipack was sensitive to blue light, while the back film was sensitive to red light, and each film strip captured a black and white record of its respective color component. And these were black and white film strips. These 3 black and white film strips, each carrying a color record, were processed separately. And these strips were then used to create 3 matrix films, each carrying a relief image of the corresponding color record. The matrix films were then treated with dyes, cyan for the red record, magenta for the green record, and yellow for the blue record. A blank, clear film strip was then passed through each of the dye-loaded matrix films in turn, and the dyes would be absorbed into the blank film, building up the full color image through a process called dye imbibiation. I've never been able to say that in my entire life. And initially, the black and white key record derived from the green strip was added to the final print to improve contrast and reduced fringing. And this key record was later eliminated as the process was refined. So 3-strip Technicolor wasn't a film stock itself, but a complex process that combined the information from 3 separate black and white film strips to create a full color image. So, I watched a movie last night. I watched a movie called High Society, which was a 1956 film that starred Bing Crosby, Frank Sinatra, and Grace Kelly. It was a musical remake of the Philadelphia Story based on the same play that the Philadelphia Story was based on. It was a 3-strip Technicolor movie that was shot in VistaVision, and it looked amazing. Now, you could make Technicolor prints of movies that necessarily weren't shot in Technicolor. And you could do that. You could make Technicolor prints because obviously they weren't going to fade and they were very, very vibrant. Well, so many of you might know, and you might have seen this article in the Hollywood Reporter because we were talking about it on Versus, that there was a Technicolor film print of Star Wars that was in a controlled environment that people either forgot about or didn't know it was there. It was the original Star Wars from 1977. I think I watched a video of it, and it did say episode 4, which means it wasn't from 77. So I don't know the answers, and this article in the Hollywood Reporter is full of inaccuracies. But anyway, it was a Technicolor print of Star Wars, which means the color was dyed, and it was preserved. It wouldn't have faded, which means it had probably one of the things about Star Wars is, as Star Wars has been changed throughout the years, remember Star Wars, when it first came out, there was a mono version of it, there were different stereo versions of it, so Star Wars always had kind of different things in it. I remember the first time I saw Star Wars, that there was a scene with Biggs in the Rebel hangar on Yavin 4 before they all took off, when Luke saw Biggs. I remember that. This could be the Mandela effect, but I remember that because I knew who Biggs was. Now, that was either excised, but there was different soundtracks in Star Wars, so there's never really, honestly, been a one definitive version of Star Wars, even all the way back to 1977. And then when George Lucas came up with the idea of, when it was very successful, even though he didn't think it was going to be, and they made Empire Strikes Back, then Empire was Episode 5, and they changed Star Wars to say Episode 4, A New Hope. But for a few years, Star Wars was only Star Wars. There was nothing else. But anyway, they found this print. The BFI found this print in their library, the British Film Institute, and they screened it. They screened this, and of course, George Lucas has claimed when he made the Star Wars special editions, there were things about the movie that he never liked. A lot of the shots of the distant shots of the Luke's land speeder in Mos Eisley, where there was like a blurry effect underneath, things like that. He wanted to change that, which he did in 1970 or 1997 when he made the special editions 20 years after the original film had come out. He was able to use CG and fix these things. And to me, in my mind, it was a little haphazard. Of course, one of the most controversial things was that the idea of Greedo in the cantina, in the Mos Eisley cantina, shoots first, because there was a thought back then that, well, Han Solo was a murderer, even though George was playing off Western tropes, and even as a kid when I was 10 years old, I knew that, no, Greedo threatened his life. Over my dead body, that's the that's the idea, whatever. I mean, that's what Greedo wanted to do. He had threatened Han's life. Han killed him. Western style. Every time they tried to make Greedo shoot first, the dumb thing about that is that Han Solo doesn't get the drop on Greedo, and Han gets lucky. And I thought that diminished his character, and that's why I thought it was a bad change. I understand that we don't want kids to think that, every kid understood that Greedo needed to die. He threatened Han Solo. But I get it. And since then, George has tried to change it and make us more convinced that Greedo, would have missed. Nobody would have missed. The gun was pointed right at Han Solo. It's always been a dumb change. It was a stupid thing to do, as were most of the changes made in the Star Wars Special Edition, like adding Jabba. We all know that Jabba was played by a human actor. I won't get into it. But anyway, the BFI found this Technicolor film print of Star Wars, the original Star Wars, the unmolested Star Wars, well, as unmolested as it could be. And, of course, people know that George Lucas has not allowed a print of Star Wars to be shown like that since 1997. It's only been the special edition. And the special editions have been changed. But one of the problems, too, is the color timing of Star Wars has never looked, in my mind, as good as the original looked. That's why I held on to my Japanese letterbox Laserdisc, because that is still, everybody goes to that Laserdisc, especially when they're doing the despecialized versions or the Team Negative versions of the Star Wars restorations of the original. They always go back to that Japanese Laserdisc as the definitive color timing of Star Wars. That's why I haven't gotten rid of mine. But anyway, listen to this ridiculous article. Star Wars looks terrible in a screening of the long-lost original 1977 version. The years have not been kind to the often romanticized original print of the sci-fi classic, which lacks all of George Lucas's post-release tweaks. They weren't post-release. They were tweaks that were made 20 years later. The film, as it was screened at the BFI, was what existed for 20 years. It's what we all rented on VHS. It's what we all got on Laserdisc, both panned and scanned and letterbox. It's what the Japanese gave us on Laserdisc. For 20 years, this is what Star Wars looked like. And it looked fucking great. Anyway, it looked like, a movie? A long-lost original print of 1977 Star Wars was recovered from an archive and screened for a group of cinema aficionados and diehard fans. Unarchived, not the BFI. I mean, give me a break. Not the BFI. You could say BFI, the British Film Institute. An audience was finally permitted to watch the first release version of the film, nearly perfectly preserved and unfaded, that creator George Lucas famously suppressed from being publicly shown on a big screen for 47 years. No. Star Wars, the version of Star Wars, other than the change in, like, A New Hope, that was the version we'd been watching from 1977 to 1997. I don't know who wrote this article, but it's ridiculous. It was not this idea that they found a print of the original Star Wars, a Technicolor print, in the BFI library, where it probably should be. The British Film Institute event was introduced by Lucasfilm boss Kathleen Kennedy, who joked that the screening was not illegal. What you're going to see is, in fact, the first print. Okay, Kathleen, love you. I do love you. It wasn't the first print. It wasn't like the first print that came off the assembly line. It was a 3-strip. Well, it wasn't shot in 3-strip, but it was a Technicolor print of Star Wars, of which there was also one in Seattle because I'd seen it. And I wanted to try. I've always tried to get that one down to scan it, but yeah. Guy named Bob owned it. What you're going to see is, in fact, the first print, and I'm not even sure there's another one quite like it. There are. I don't know if this is... from what I understood, there are 3. This would be the 4th. People knew about it. I don't know what the... This was... I mean, this is... We're going back 30, 40 years, too, that these prints have been around. And the result... An attending film critic from The Telegraph who attended the screening last week admitted the unaltered original looks terrible by modern standards. Okay... If you're a film critic for The Telegraph and you're calling Star Wars a print of Star Wars from 1977 that it looked terrible, you're a fucking idiot. Because it looked like Star Wars looked on film. The problem is, how do you not have an awareness of film history? When I become a gatekeeper, I'm not saying somebody is wrong. What I am saying is that person does not have a sense of, you have to understand what you're watching. And most people today haven't seen film prints of old movies. So they don't know what an actual print even looks like anymore. Because most of the classic films that people have watched, they've watched on home video. And what is, I don't think, understood is when you're watching something on home video, even if you have a 4K disc, you're watching it in an electronic space, which is very different to watching light shine through celluloid and projected on a screen. It's a whole different medium, and if McLuhan was true, if he was right, and the medium is the message, cinema is very different than watching something on TV. The entire quality of everything about looking at an image, an electronic image, is different. The color space, the light space, the way you perceive things. Because nobody sees prints anymore, you're watching a DCP. You're literally watching a digital version of something, even in the theater. Unless you're going to see an actual film print projected. So most people, even this film critic, of course, he says it's going to look terrible. What he should have said was, it was really interesting to see a film print and compare it and contrast it to what we're used to today. That's what I would expect an educated person to do, but apparently not. While fans understandably tend to focus on Lucas's most intrusive creative moves, adding the jarring CG version of Jabba the Hutt, having Greedo shoot first, stuffing distracting CG creatures and droids into Mos Eisley, the amount of subsequent polish and tweaks over the years is so extensive that many aspects of the original look just as noticeably fake as the egregious CG. I assure you, as somebody who saw this, because people forget, when Star Wars came out, there was nothing to compare it to. Nothing looked like that in cinema history. So, of course, when you go back, now you have almost 50 years of watching the improvements that have been made. And I get where people are coming from, but that's like going back and talking about Ray Harryhausen's stop-motion animation not looking good now. I felt like I was watching a completely different film, wrote Robbie Collin, who called the print a joyously craggy, grubby, stolidly carpentered spectacle that looks more like fancy dress than grand sci-fi epic. Every scene had the visceral sense of watching actual people photographed doing actual things with sets and props that had been physically sewn and glued into place. The slapstick between C-3PO and R2-D2 looked clunkier and therefore funnier. The Death Star panels were less like supercomputers than wooden boards with lights stuck on, and so better attuned to the frequency of make-believe. It felt less like watching a blockbuster in the modern sense than the greatest game of dress-up in the desert anyone ever played. I mean, I listened to this. It's so weird. I'll tell you. So I watched High Society last night, right? It's a movie made in 1956 about, really rich people in Newport. The Newport Jazz Festival. Louis Armstrong was in it. Now, it's not a great movie. It looked incredible. The Dolby Atmos mix was terrific. But everything about the movie does not look or feel like a Hollywood movie of today. But I knew what I was watching. I was dipping my spirit, as it were, back to 1956. Celeste Holm, goddess Celeste Holm, played such a different role than she played in All About Eve. She's so sweet, and she's the woman that you wish you could have met in your whole life. But she is not like that in High Society. She's, well, look at me. I'm going to help you out, Frank. She's Frank Sinatra's photographer, and he plays a reporter. It was great. But when I'm watching High Society, you know what I don't do? I don't go, wow, this looks craggy. It looks like this is shot mostly on a soundstage. And they're on a boat at sea, but I can tell it's really just rear projection. Man, I hate that. From day one, George Lucas has been making changes to these films, he said. It hasn't just been here's one big scene and change here. It's been the little nuance. It's been the sound effects. It's been the smallest details, which you do not notice now because you don't see it. Aldridge noted differences like R2-D2 isn't hiding behind rocks when the Tusken Raiders come for them. That's right. There are so many little things that I noticed in the cantina. Yeah, there's different creatures. There's been a cleaning up of James Earl Jones's voice, certainly. So ironically, a version of Star Wars that Lucas for so long didn't want to show seems to give viewers more respect for Lucas due to gaining some appreciation for his extensive and controversial tinkering. Both reviewers noted, however, that the theater burst into applause when Han shot first during the Greedo confrontation. Enthused Aldridge, Han Solo was so much cooler. Well, I mean, was he did one thing, but yes, he was cooler because he kills Greedo in cold blood after Greedo threatens him because he doesn't hesitate. Lucas's tweaks to the print began with the very first theatrical re-release of Star Wars in 1981. Until now, the studio has only permitted the screening of various special editions. BFI noted with Disney and Lucasfilm for the rights for a back-to-back screening on the festival's opening night. The particular BFI print was stored for 4 decades at a temperature of 23 degrees Fahrenheit to preserve its quality. Lucas, over the years, has been rather firm about not screening the original, and when asked in 2004 by the Associated Press why he doesn't simply release the original version along with the special edition, rather grumpily shot back, "The special edition, that's the one I wanted out there. The other movie, it's on VHS if anybody wants it. I'm not going to spend we're talking millions of dollars here, the money and the time to refurbish that, because to me it doesn't really exist anymore. It's like, this is the movie I wanted it to be, and I'm sorry you saw a half-completed film and fell in love with it, but I want it to be the way I want it to be. I'm the one who has to take responsibility for it. I'm the one who has to have everybody throw rocks at me all the time. So at least if they're going to throw rocks at me, then they're going to throw rocks at me for something I love rather than something I think is not very good, or at least something I think is not finished." And you know, George, I love George Lucas, but he's retconning. I mean, you know, Star Wars was pretty well finished to everyone's abilities at the time. And if you want to continue to tinker with things as technology gets better, when are you ever going to be finished with something? And I think that one of the great things about Star Wars is it is of its time. Anyway, I figured, look, the more the days pass, the more Andor, with things that are going on in this country now, the more Andor seems to be, well, like great science fiction, prescient. You know, it feels like what's going on in the world. Andor was written years ago, and yet it's become very timely because Tony Gilroy was trying to make something timeless about the idea of empire and rebellion. You know, about how does a democracy become an empire, or what happens in the wake of that. And I was just following orders. I mean, we're seeing it played out on the streets of America today. We're seeing other things played out across the globe today. And like all great art, it continues to resonate. And the fact that Andor is something out of Star Wars is amazing. It's amazing. And, you know, I always go to Medium. I go to Medium because, not necessarily because it's the place to find the best writing in the world, but there's a lot of people that write about imagination connoisseur subjects. And I think that it's a great place to find good material to read and share. And before I read this article, let me just jump ahead and see you guys are sending in some super chats, and I would like to just deal with these right away. The Grayest Star, was that like an Astari? The Grayest Star says, the Grayest Star is one word, but the Grayest Star? I've only recently come across your channel. I love hearing your takes. What did you think of Rings of Power Season 2 and Mandalorian Season 3? Ooh. Well, fortunately, Rings of Power Season 2 was, I think, a marked improvement from Season 1, although I still think the whole enterprise is creatively bankrupt. I mean, I understand, make more money off the Lord of the Rings franchise, but so much of it was made up out of whole cloth. And the timeline is all wrong, but I guess they're doing their best. Mandalorian Season 3, I hated. I was so disappointed in that season. I thought that the storytelling, I mean, you come off of Season 2's episode with Bill Burr. That to me was like peak Mandalorian. But going back to Mandalore and going back and forth, somebody lands their ship, you go into the cave, you come out of the cave, you go back into the cave. I mean, all of that stuff was, I thought, gobbledygook. And there was some gems within it, but I really didn't like Mandalorian Season 3. It wasn't as bad as Book of Boba Fett, but it was, to me, inexplicably bad. And I'll be frank, I didn't think any of the Mandalorian was peak. It was good and fun, but I look at that show and it could have been much, much, much better. Just like the Boba Fett show to me was inexplicably awful. After a first episode I thought was intriguing, but man, did not dig. The Richards art is now a new, is that The Richard? Hopefully one day we're going to see his show. He has become a new member again. 1001 Johnny says, "Oh, heck no. We analyze here in this house. We are fanatics. That is fans." Well, thank you, 1001 Johnny. I appreciate that. Major Chai Chai says, what does your t-shirt say? My t-shirt said, ever want to know what hot and steamy sounds like? True Noir, because True Noir is hot and steamy. By the way, you can go to truenoir.co and you can order the entire series. Somebody put also in the comments in the last show that they didn't appreciate the bad language, so they didn't want to get the rest of it or listen to it. They haven't listened to it because, listen, True Noir is definitely R-rated. It's R-rated, so there you go. Destiny Captain says, Rob Headroom, all Rob, all the time. I guess so. Juju says, is an imagination connoisseur, became a member. Thank you. Gold Coast Memories says, this kid is talking about it like some Alien 3 work print was shown. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know what was the point of that. Not really sure. 1001 Johnny also sent in a few tips. Let me get to those real quick. And 1001 Johnny says, I gotta say, Rob, I feel that modern moviegoers' complaints of CGI being used in place of practical effects or a third act of an action film turning into a CGI fest to be an unfounded complaint. Fantasy isn't real, it's a heightened reality. Also, CG is just a tool. You know, it's more tools in the box. If we can excuse a rear-projected boat ride today, surely they excused a rear-projected boat ride back then. They did. Movie effects, I think, need the audience to want to be transported and not blame the film for not taking them there all the way. Good words. You always have something insightful to say. I agree. I mean, it's so interesting because so many of my favorite films, you know, you go back and you watch, say, Hitchcock. There's a lot of rear projection in that. And, you know, back in the day, the audiences weren't necessarily so savvy. They accepted it. You know, you just went with it. I mean, Stanley Kubrick has Tom Cruise walking down a New York City street and the background is all rear projection. But it's still, I think it still works because the movie's a dream. You know, it's based on a movie, or the movie's based on a book called Dream Story, or Tromneville. But it completely, I think, works for the movie. Oh, John from New York asks, any updates on the physical release for True Noir? I'm working on those. Let's see. Band Brindlebeard 3 says 70s King Crimson or Yes. Okay, I was more of a Yes person because I came to Yes when I was a kid, whereas King Crimson I found later. Yes, basically, Yes songs. You know, I had the triple album because, you know, it's a sci-fi album cover. But King Crimson, that was something I came to later on. But King Crimson's great as well. So, but well, I don't know if I could ever put one over the other. If I had discovered King Crimson's probably better, but you know, you can't pry Yes away from me. You know, I'm always close to the edge, right? But that's a good question. It's a good question. At least people are still asking that question, which I like. So we're going to get into this article. This is a great article on Andor, and I have to say the book is put away, but it's by one of my favorite Medium writers, a guy named Cole Haddon. And it was funny because I basically came across him on Medium around the same. I found this book, Psalms for the End of the World, that he wrote kind of at the same time, but coming at it from different places. When I started reading his Medium articles, I'm like, wait a minute, I got that dude's book, you know? And here it is. Here is Psalms for the End of the World. I would suggest it is quite a good book, and I would suggest if you are interested in it's got time travel, it's got science fiction, it's got all kinds of things in it, but in an unconventional way, to check it out. But here's and Cole Haddon also is a TV producer. He's worked in the industry. Really interesting guy. Love his takes, but I couldn't. He published this article literally 6 hours ago, and it's on Medium, and I'm like, oh. I was, you know, I'm always looking for stuff to talk about because I don't just like to hear my own voice. I don't listen to my own shows. I like to share other people's insights into Star Wars that I find particularly interesting. So, and And the article is called How Andor Blows Up Star Wars Obsession with Moral Absolutism, a.k.a. catnip for Bobby B here. Tony Gilroy's series has a lot to say about the 21st century, our blind devotion to ancient religions and their ideas of good and evil, and why the Jedi had it coming. Amen. This is by Colehad. The concept of the duality of man has been part of the human story for so long, nobody quite knows where it originated. But the general definition of it, that our species contains both good and evil, is so commonplace in the history of our mythologies that we can safely assume it's baked into our race memory at this point. Unfortunately, it's in the attempt to explain our contradictory nature that things have become muddled in history, as most cultures have never been comfortable with the idea that humans are morally imperfect beings. For millennia now, the favorite explanation for our moral deficits has been to reduce our complicated, incredibly messy world into literal good and evil, with great big capital letters, and then externalizing these forces anyway so we can actively battle against the latter. This dichotomy is epitomized by the roles of God and Satan in Judeo-Christian beliefs, although I always preferred the little angels and devils that appeared on the shoulders of Looney Tunes cartoon characters. George Lucas understood this very well when he used his deep knowledge of Occidental mythology to dream up the Star Wars prequel and original trilogies, long-billed space fantasies. In them, the relationship between good and evil manifest as the light and dark side of the Force. For nearly 5 decades, the cosmic battle between Jedi and Sith, two cults trapped in an endless religious war, has captivated audiences by elevating supernatural beings over the agency of mere mortals. Andor, from creator Tony Gilroy, reveals how flawed this approach was, and in hurling the franchise's light and dark mythology out the writer's room window, delivers one of the greatest TV series ever produced. Nothing I'm about to tell you should suggest I've not always loved and will always love George Lucas's Star Wars films. Me too. But my relationship with them shouldn't defy how I and the world around me have changed. I'm reminded of a scene in the film 12 Monkeys, by the way, itself based on Chris Marker's movie La Jetée, which is a series of still photographs, but I suggest everyone see it. It's probably on the Criterion, the new 4K. You can find it out there. It's probably on YouTube, hell. I'm reminded of a scene in the film 12 Monkeys in which the character of James Cole, Bruce Willis, compares the past to cinema. The movie never changes. It can't change. But every time you see it, it seems different because you're different. That's the key, isn't it? Because you're different. I believe we can better understand who we are as a culture and as individuals by constantly interrogating our most closely held beliefs about art. And amen, I believe this wholeheartedly 100%. If art is a mirror held up to society, then we must accept that what it shows us can and will change as we change. This means it would be a mistake to treat Star Wars as a sacred cow by refusing to let its role in our culture evolve. Yes, Star Wars theory. So let's reconsider, in my typically serpentine fashion, the prequel and original trilogies through the lens of what Andor has to say about our 21st century society and our generally blind devotion to ancient religions and their ideas of good and evil. By the time I was 25, my best friend had found Jesus at a megachurch and gotten engaged to the first woman there who seemed to pay him any attention. Actually, I take that back. The first female member of the congregation who paid him any attention filleted him on their first date, which he immediately professed great shame over. I wouldn't have. You might wonder, I would have asked for a second date. You might wonder, what does this anecdote have to do with Star Wars? Surely they were watching it when she went down on him, right? No, they weren't, or at least I assume they weren't. I never asked, which would have been weird. For now, I ask that you simply go with it. A month after receiving his apparent disgraceful blowjob, my best friend met his future wife, And for the rest of their engagement, they spent every opportunity they could to inform me about the temptation of sin and the terrible nature of evil I was leaving myself open to by not embracing Jesus Christ as my ultimate Lord and Savior. To grasp how quickly and supremely their minds had been warped, I was advised I shouldn't watch Schindler's List. Schindler's List, because a man such as myself couldn't help lusting after the naked bodies of the Jewish women being led to their deaths in the gas chambers. Evil, for evangelicals such as these, was an ever-present threat, very similar to the dark side. Satan did not take vacations, and the only way to protect ourselves against this wily influence was by cutting ourselves off from all earthly pleasures, like the Jedi, and of course armoring ourselves with the spirit of a dead Palestinian Jew who may or may not have ever existed. This dead Jew would return one day, I was told, to fulfill his promise as a kind of chosen one, to vanquish Satan's evil for good and welcome all his faithful back into heaven for an eternity that always kind of sounded to me like an all-expenses-paid trip to a resort you really love. You know, the kind with all-you-can-eat taco bars and bottomless margaritas. But like the spicy kind with habanero salt-kissed rims, you know what I mean? Oh, I do. Ultimately, I became so uncomfortable around my friend's wife, whose understanding of the world seemed to match the one I had at 10 years old when I was still forced to attend Sunday school, I broke it to my best friend of half a decade and a friend since junior high school that I couldn't know him anymore, because I genuinely believed his wife would try and harm people, including me, if she imagined her deity told her to do so. He told me I was crazy, and I had to chuckle, because he tried to convince me on several occasions that Satan had put dinosaur and ancient hominid fossils in the earth to test the Christian God's faithful. For a while now, I've found myself conflicted by the role of the Force in Star Wars, or rather the role of the non-Force users in the ongoing storyline. The way these characters exist, almost as an afterthought to the spiritual conflict being waged between the Jedi and the Sith. Consider Alderaan. It gets blown up, and we never hear about it or its billions of dead again. Leia Organa struggles with the loss of her entire culture for screen seconds before she's flinging quippy insults at her rescuers on the first Death Star. This indifference to civilian casualties and deaths is universal in all three Star Wars trilogies and fairly consistent throughout the franchise. If you're not a Jedi, you matter very little in terms of character work, and this is the point. It's important to note I'm talking about characters we love here. Leia has zero character arc through the original trilogy, not a Jedi yet. Chewbacca, nada. He really is nothing more than the family pet. Han goes from rogue criminal to heroic good guy, at least that's an arc, but never gets to sacrifice his life, which would have solidified that transformation. Why can't I get that word? The most interesting character arc outside of Luke and Darth Vader's Force-related turns out to be Lando Calrissian's, which was at least morally complicated. By the time the prequels arrived more than a decade later, we got more non-Force users like Jar Jar Binks, he's an idiot to useful idiot, and actually that it's besides our lone female protagonist Padme Amidala. The thing is, Padme has even less of an arc than her daughter did, because Padme is just there to be Anakin Skywalker's crush and then get murdered by him. It doesn't matter how intelligent or strong she's written or how many bad guys she blasters down. She was never going to make a bigger difference to her galaxy than leaving a Sith Lord weepy. Yes, there's the sequel trilogy, but somehow the non-Force users are treated even worse there. Star Wars has always been about Jedi and Sith. That's my point. And characters who don't possess a faculty for the Force, who are not adherents of a hokey religion, as Han refers to it in A New Hope, are perpetually caught up in the lives of those who do. They exist, they're a part of the bigger story, but they're only really there as NPCs in the Jedi and Sith's eternal war. It's a feeling I often have when watching the news today, that we're all trapped in a world run by people cosplaying mythological scenarios utterly divorced from objective reality. This lack of existential agency on the part of non-Force users in the prequel and original trilogies was narratively convenient for George Lucas because it means that the ideology of the Jedi or their religious absolutism never gets challenged in any serious way. For example, Luke Skywalker never discusses the space cult he just joined with Han Solo or Leia, giving them a chance to poke holes in his fantastic claims. He only gets into this topic with fellow cultists like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda. This means that audiences have no reason to question the Jedi or any of their religious claims either. We accept them as noble truth, along with the Force dichotomy, light and dark, as law. Even when Luke's good Jedi masters push him to assassinate his own evil father, even lying to him to trick him into doing it, we never question their ethics or their morality. Jedi are good, everything else is evil. George Lucas said so. Either you're with us or you're with the terrorists. George W. Bush made this declaration 10 days after September 11th, 2001. It was yet another reminder that the United States perceived itself to be a force of good, and to even question that position made you its enemy. Not shockingly, many around the globe accepted and embraced the role of antagonist to such moral absolutism. In the prequels, we finally see what happens when a Jedi is forced to defend themselves against the common sense of the real world. Luke Skywalker's father, Anakin, attempts to debate politics with his senator crush, Padme Amidala. Big mistake, because in doing so, he reveals how juvenile he is. His answer to legislative gridlock is to essentially abolish democracy and replace it with a dictator. Padme reacts aghast and insists the better solution is to work to change the system. Democracy is hard after all. The audience similarly gasps at Anakin's words, thinking that will lead to his fall to the dark side and eventual resurrection as the right hand of a dictator. As Darth Vader, he will kill Padme, his own wife. She becomes one of the millions of victims in Star Wars of ancient religions projecting their endless conflict and binary moral code on a galaxy where things aren't so black and white. Yes, it's fair to point out that Anakin is not espousing Jedi ideology here, but what he is espousing is a direct response to the moral failings of that ideology. What I mean is, the Jedi are far more responsible for Anakin's fall than future Emperor Palpatine's manipulations. They refuse to allow him to mourn the loss of his mother. They tell him he's to deny himself basic human connection. They turn him into a holy warrior whose only choice is to hide his confusion and terror from the very people who are meant to be caring for him. Why the hell would Anakin trust the Jedi Order's approach to anything as sound? His response to Padme about how to fix democracy isn't petulant based on his religious conditioning. It's incredibly clear-eyed in his mind. This is why Anakin is such a wonderful character despite how he was received at the time of the prequel's releases. Say you recruit a dumb kid into your cult and fail to educate him about anything other than your religious doctrine. You tell him he's a peacekeeper before ordering him to go to mass murder a military opponent while simultaneously assuring everything in the universe can be understood only as good and evil. Of course, his only choice when confronted with your hypocritical flaws will be to turn into the opposing force. If the Jedi have become this flawed, then of course the Sith must be right, which means if the Jedi support the Republic, then the Republic must be the problem. There's just no other choice presented. Not a lick of gray between the two. At least, not in George Lucas's Star Wars. 4 years after George W. Bush told the world it was either with the United States or against it in its so-called war against terror, Anakin Skywalker would rage against his friend Obi-Wan Kenobi. "If you're not with me, then you're my enemy." Many assume Lucas used this line as a direct reference to Bush's patriotic bloviating, but while it might be, the effect on the audience actually reinforced the Jedi's own binary thinking of the universe rather than incriminated Anakin. Only a Sith deals in absolutes, Obi-Wan tells his Padawan, as if the Jedi don't traffic in the exact same moral proclamations. Years later, Yoda will tell Anakin's son Luke, "Once you start down the dark path, forever will it dominate your destiny. No room for mistakes, no room for growth, No wiggle room to acknowledge that not every problem in the galaxy has only two kinds of solutions. Just the same kind of childlike approach to existence that my best friend and his wife had embraced when they were saved by their megachurch. Yeah, Obi-Wan, obviously Anakin thinks like a Sith, because that's how you and the Jedi taught him to think. I couldn't tell you what the thematic through line of the Star Wars sequels was. I still can't explain them in any way that could hold up to critical interrogation, but I do know there was a horrible backlash amongst some Star Wars fans to the interpretation of Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi. The last time we'd seen Luke, and I don't mean his brief cameo at the end of The Force Awakens, he'd become a Jedi like his father before him by rejecting the religion's dogmatic rigidity by abandoning it. He put his faith not in archaic rules written countless generations before, but in human connections denied to his father, to his friends, and ultimately the ghost of Anakin Skywalker rattling around somewhere inside Darth Vader's armor. He was a new way forward for the Jedi, in other words. Maybe this is why I was able to embrace The Last Jedi as one of my favorite in the Star Wars series, because I saw a man who had, in his attempt to become a new kind of Jedi Grandmaster, a new kind of High Priest of the light side, inadvertently applied the same flawed thinking of his predecessors. It's not as if he had any other teachers. So when Luke looks into the future and sees Ben Solo destroy everything he built, he again almost repeats the sin of his own mentor, Obi-Wan Kenobi, who also killed, or thought he had, someone he loved to protect the galaxy. This is exactly what both Obi-Wan and Yoda had ordered Luke to do on Dagobah as well. Luke's temptation isn't the dark side in this case. It's to follow the old Jedi way that led his own masters to behave in such a morally appalling ways. That's what Ben Solo reacts to, turning him into the dark side instead, just as Anakin Skywalker had once reacted to the old Jedi way. There it is again. If the Jedi are wrong, then the imposing force must be right. That's an incredibly binary way of thinking, but it's what happens when you reduce the universe to the light and dark side, to good and evil. This is exactly what we've continued to do in the 21st century, trying to reduce our complicated world, one full of endless contradictions and necessary compromises, to a man-made dichotomy that made no sense in 5000 BCE and makes even less sense today. Whoever is not with me is against me. These words are spoken by Jesus Christ in the book of Matthew 12:30. In the battle between God and Satan, between good and evil, there is no middle ground. For years, we've all been told the only interesting thing about Star Wars was the Jedi and the Sith, lightsabers and lightning figures, dynasties and dynasties. You get the picture. It couldn't survive without those things, which is, of course, why Jedi in particular were shoehorned into almost every Star Wars story created for the screen, and books and comics. Star Wars was a fantasy, plain and simple. If you wanted science fiction, you could always check out Star Trek. But then, Andor happened. Creator Tony Gilroy's narrative masterstroke was stripping the franchise of its allegedly most important ingredient, the Force. The result? You're left with a world where nothing is binary. There is no light side and dark side or problematic ancient codes dictating how to be good or evil, though the events exist in the fallout of that war. No, there is only chaos, from which democracy and freedom must be prized by characters who constantly question if they've gone too far. They don't commit atrocities with moral certainty. They commit them constantly aware they are losing themselves, that they trade their lives for a future they can't even necessarily imagine yet. And they do them so that we, in the audience, are forced to ask ourselves if what we're cheering are acts of heroic rebellion or brutal acts of terrorism. Or maybe, just maybe, they're both. Because freedom has always come with a moral price. Because freedom is as messy as our world, especially when fascism, imperialism, colonialism, and so on are involved. and tried to explain why human beings do anything by resorting to ancient ideas of good and evil is as childish and intellectually lazy as Anakin Skywalker's answer to a problematic democracy. Yes, human beings contain ugly multitudes, but we are also capable of profound love, beauty, and sacrifice for the greater good. What we aren't is the playthings of external forces of supernatural good and evil. Instead, we're the victims of those who believe we are, all of us forced to somehow survive the imaginary battle between deities and devils they're waging with real-world consequences. George Lucas's Star Wars embraced Occidental mythology much to our delight, but that meant the most culturally destructive parts of it too. The myth of the Holy War, the myth of the Chosen One, the myth of ancient destinies. Nearly 50 years later, Gilroy and his writer's room presented an alternative vision of a galaxy far, far away, one that reflects our real world, where good guys do bad things and evil is banal rather than magical. Put another way, Lucas wanted us to be afraid of Sith Lords, while Gilroy believes the most successful monsters are morally rudderless office managers and bureaucrats trying to score a promotion. I checked out a couple of social media feeds today. The distinct approaches to Star Wars that I've just described played out across all the films, but with regards to our real-world events instead. On one side were people who seemed to believe our world is caught up in a great battle between the forces of good and evil that requires everyone who doesn't agree with them to be denounced as anti-whatever or pro-whatever, label it whatever you need to, but all resolutions must comport to their apocalyptic conflict narrative. On the other side, there were people arguing everything is confusing and terrible, and maybe we should try and find a way to salvage something out of the chaos and trauma, and even if it's going to be wildly imperfect. Of course, the summary I just offered is clearly two-sided, but it's a very different one than I've been discussing here. Do we choose the convenient fantasy of George Lucas's Star Wars, or do we choose the difficult reality of Tony Gilroy's Andor? One provides the impossible promise of a happy ending. The other accepts everything is always going to be shit, but what matters is we keep fighting together against the seemingly impossible odds stacked against us in an attempt to create something less shit. At my 20th high school reunion, I ran into my old best friend, and I warmly greeted him and his wife. I'd missed him, despite how we'd fallen out. I expressed my regret over how things had ended between us, at which point he leaned in close so I could hear him over the music, and quickly and succinctly summed up what had happened in this way. We've done a lot of growing up since then. We've learned things aren't so black and white. I left the reunion feeling oddly hopeful about the world. That comes to us from writer Cole Haddon. I think obviously that had more to say than just a rumination on Star Wars Andor, but I want to point out that Cole wrote this novel, Psalms for the End of the World, that I highly recommend, which you should check out. So yeah, now I don't know if I understand Star Wars, but I think Cole Haddon certainly has an interesting perspective, which, by the way, I happen to agree with. I mean, it's been really interesting watching people. One of the things about Star Wars is it's simple. It truly is a fairy tale, and I understand it's easy to digest. As the one commenter said, I just want to sit down and be entertained by something. That's true. But you know what? Every time somebody has done a good job expanding the Star Wars universe and delving into it and making it more complex, when it's done well, they've always succeeded. Knights of the Old Republic, for instance. Pretty interesting how Grand Admiral Thrawn was depicted in Timothy Zahn's original Thrawn trilogy. The problem is, Star Wars was never meant to be the cultural force that it's become. George Lucas and Steven Spielberg famously lit off to Hawaii because they didn't think it was going to succeed. And George Lucas himself, I think if he went back and wanted to do his life over again, I wonder what the world would have been like without Star Wars, and the filmmaker that made THX 1138 and American Graffiti could have gone on and not made movies about his obsession with Flash Gordon. Or what if he was able to score the rights to Flash Gordon and Dino De Laurentiis didn't manage to snag them and put out Flash Gordon the same year that The Empire Strikes Back came out? I don't know. All I know is I love Star Wars, but I think it's been the best and maybe the worst thing for film fandom and for imagination connoisseurs. But for me, at least, it was very apparent that after Empire Strikes Back, which George Lucas famously doesn't like, and Mr. Rinsler very much documents that in his book, The Making of The Empire Strikes Back. If you haven't read Rinsler's coffee table books, I mean, hell, not just Star Wars, Empire, and Jedi, but on Alien, the Alien franchise, on Planet of the Apes, those books are essential reading. It's too bad that he passed away, and why his book on The Force Awakens was suppressed, well, I think we can all guess. But what a punk-ass move to suppress that book. The man passed away, and somebody decided, oh, I wonder who that could be. That nope, that book wasn't going to get published. Too bad, and that's a damn shame, because I would really love to read that book. And by the way, if someone actually had a galley of it, or maybe had a file of it somewhere lying around, I wouldn't be adverse to reading it. Somebody out there has one. Somebody knows. It's kind of like Rorschach, you know. Somebody knows. Where's the Adrian Veidt of Rinsler's Force Awakens book? Can I get it? I don't know. But no, I mean, I think that it's been interesting to watch the fan community, even the pacing of Andor. Now, I don't think Andor is perfect, but I do think that, as Cole Haddon did, delving into the Star Wars universe outside of the Jedi and the Sith was a great idea. I've always maintained that I was much more interested in seeing the universe. Star Wars actually tells us a lot about the universe outside of the conflict, because we do get to see Mos Eisley, we do get to meet Luke, we do get to see his home life. You know, even though we don't, you can go back and you can even, I like watching the deleted scenes that we all have now seen when Luke does go to Anchorhead or Tosche Station or wherever when Cammy and Fixer are there as well, along with Biggs. I mean, we've seen it. It's all very, very interesting. And if you listen to, of course, the audio drama, the Star Wars audio drama, they delve way into all of that. And, you know, I would like to have seen more of it. I mean, we've seen the Star Wars underworld, but we still are defining Star Wars between good and evil. Maybe that's why Skeleton Crew had a little bit more to say. I mean, it was interesting to see more of that civilian part of the universe, but pretty interesting. So, yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think? I mean, is Andor played out? Do we still have things that we want to say about Andor? I think that we do. I have a lot of letters that I've got in now. So whatever you think about this story, whatever you think about Cole Haddon's comments on good and evil, and look, I understand that he does talk about religion. I meant no disrespect to anybody's religions, but considering we're watching the battle of good versus evil, if you want to call it that, and depending on which side is good and which side's evil, and we've watched what used to be the good side seemingly has now flipped, and most people think they're the evil side now. I don't know. We're watching it play out. We don't need Star Wars anymore. We're actually watching it happen on a daily basis, unfortunately. Or fortunately, depending on a certain point of view. But I would really like to, I'm going to start reading these letters because they're good. They're all pretty different. This one comes from Corey Van Castle Cook. Corey Van Castle Cook. This is a great letter. I'm gonna say that, and I haven't gotten into this topic yet on the show. I've talked a little bit about it, but this is something new. Dear Rob, I believe in equality. At its most basic, equality entails an equal opportunity for individuals to accomplish a goal, whether that's attaining a job, publishing a book, or making the roster for the Buffalo Bills. I yearn for a future much like the post-scarcity meritocracy of Star Trek. Thank you for saying it that way. Now, will it happen? Well, that depends on the human race, and currently forward momentum toward the utopia has stalled. Part of the reason involves something I find decidedly perplexing. Our culture has conflated equality with all people's opinions possessing equal validity. This is not only intellectually dishonest, it's potentially dangerous. Just last week, for example, U.S. Health and Human Services Secretary RFK Jr. dismissed the 17-member advisory committee on immunization practices. The committee, consisting of people, will now die because a select group of people believe that RFK Jr.'s opinion carries more weight than experts in the field. Or let me put it in terms that are a little less political. If I go to my primary care physician and ultimately discover I have a brain head and bacon fat will cure my glioblastoma, my oncologist's opinion de facto means more because they went to medical school, did a residency, performed surgeries, and maybe even had articles published in peer-reviewed journals. The same crisis I described above also applies to fandom. As you've pointed out correctly multiple times, Rob, the studio system as we know it has irrevocably changed. It's being inundated and run by venture capitalist douche bros who wouldn't know true art if someone slammed Van Gogh's Starry Night over their heads. I know it's show business and not show charity, but there needs to be a balance between art and commerce, and right now the commerce part rules the day. The people in charge have incorrectly concluded that listening to fandom and giving their opinions equal weight when creators that have worked for decades in the industry will ultimately net studios more money. While in some instances this may be true, it doesn't necessarily result in stellar storytelling. Look at Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker, for example. Fandom was so outraged by the direction Rian Johnson took in The Last Jedi that J.J. Abrams at Disney allowed fandom's opinions to shape the final film in the sequel trilogy. As a consequence, we received gobbledygook like light speed skipping, and somehow Palpatine returned. Or look at what happened with the follow-up to Skyfall. Many diehard James Bond fans felt that Skyfall was too much like The Dark Knight and were critical. As a result, Sam Mendes brought back more traditional Bond elements like intimidating henchmen and plenty of gadgets for Spectre. Unfortunately, what we got was a bloated mess with a less than compelling story. On the flip side, certain films succeed because they expressly ignore fandom. The best examples of this might be Denis Villeneuve's Blade Runner 2049. In the run-up to the film's release, I found many fans desperately wanting to know the quintessential mystery of the first movie, namely, is Rick Deckard a replicant? No. Yet Villeneuve's masterpiece deliberately chooses to not answer that question. In fact, the entire film and its themes lay out the framework that the answer to the question doesn't matter. Furthermore, that asking the question is completely missing the point of both the original and the sequel. Replicants are sentient just like humans. They both love, hate, feel joy, express gratitude, and experience regret. Placing replicants into a separate category because they are synthetic only serves to otherize them and categorize them as something less than. In the end, both groups are people, worthy of love, honor, and respect. Yet Blade Runner 2049 works because the film inherently possesses authorship. Villeneuve simultaneously manages to respect the sandbox he's playing in and craft a story that's uniquely his own. Moreover, Villeneuve's authorship is so successful it recontextualizes Ridley Scott's original and somehow makes his seminal work even better. It got me thinking, is it possible for fandom and authorship to work side by side to create something wondrous? Or are they forever diametrically opposed to each other? Which brings me to Hulu's animated anthology film, Predator, Killer of Killers. It's hard to fathom, but in just 2 short years, the Predator franchise will celebrate its 40th anniversary. Unfortunately, since Arnold's 1987 all-timer, the franchise has varied in quality. It's ranged the gamut from popcorn escapism, Predator 2 and Predators, to disappointment, The Predator, to downright atrocious dreck, AVP Requiem, although I will say it does show us the Predator homeworld, which has given me endless amounts of delight. It occurred to me that in order for the Predator franchise to regain success, someone needed to come along that not only appreciated the franchise, but possessed a clear vision and would take the series in a new direction. Enter director Dan Trachtenberg. Trachtenberg's 2022 film Prey, starred Amber Midthunder, not only reinvigorated the franchise, it reminded audiences how great a Predator film can be. Setting Prey in the early 18th century and following a young female Comanche warrior completely flipped the paradigm. It freed Trachtenberg from the lore and canon cage of the franchise, allowing him to tell a dynamic and captivating story that still resonated with the qualities that made the Predator films great. Furthermore, Prey actualized a long hoped-for outcome from the franchise's fans, namely the desire to see the Predator, the species known as the Utja, in a different time period. Almost immediately afterwards, fandom began clamoring for Predator stories set during the time of the Vikings or involving samurai and feudal Japan or perhaps World War II. Trachtenberg looked at fandom's suggestions and said, why not all three? Yet, Predator, Killer of Killers works because of Trachtenberg's authorship. Several elements coalesce to create a distinct through line through all three stories. All three segments, the shield, the sword, and the bullet, utilize the same animation style from the company The Third Floor, Inc. That's actually, by the way, The Third Floor is a previous company that became an animation company, and my entire large poster collection, including the first 6 Bond movies, including The Great Escape, oh, so many, including Zombie. Anyway, they're all hanging in The Third Floor. One day there's a couple of them I would love to get back. Anyway, Anyway. All three embrace stylized violence and visual spectacle that would have been difficult to do in live action. All three also draw stylistic influences from 1988's Akira and the Netflix series Arcane. It helps create connective tissue between all three stories that screams authorship. However, what really struck me was how invested I was in each of these stories on an emotional level. When it comes to crafting quality films, to me it comes down to keeping the story and your characters at the forefront of your film. Yes, the Viking action in the first segment, The Shield, is top-notch, but it's bolstered by Ursa's relationship with her son Anders. Ursa wants her son to take his place as a Viking warrior, but as the story unfolds, it becomes patently clear that her obsession with revenge takes top priority, and the consequences are devastating. The complexity of familial relationships is another through line throughout Predator, Killer of Killers. Whereas The Shield focuses on a mother and son relationship, the second sequence, The Sword, focuses on brothers in feudal Japan. And what's unique about The Sword is how it almost is entirely devoid of dialogue. Trachtenberg allows the visuals to tell the story of Kenji and Kiyoshi, two estranged brothers who clash after their father passes. The fact that one is a samurai and one is a ninja who eventually team up to take on the Predator is just frosting on the cake. It's the fraternal dynamic that cuts the deepest, and by the end had me tearing up. Me too, actually. Never thought I'd say that about a freaking Predator movie. The family theme carries over into the third segment, The Bullet, which takes audiences high above the sky in the Battle of the Atlantic during World War II. Just before young Torres ships out, his father decides to stop bailing him out. He insists that Torres needs to be able to fix his own problems, whether they be mechanical or relationship-focused. To say Torres learns his lesson in trial by fire is an understatement. The aerial battle between World War II fighter pilots and a Predator spaceship is truly a sight to see. But again, the family theme hits home as Torres attempts to save his adoptive brothers of the sky. He's forced to innovate and fix a problem with no direction and the odds against him. Torres is literally out on a wing trying to find a solution. Although all three stories are disparate and different in their own ways, the emotional ambiguity of each situation engenders empathy and makes the audience relate and connect to our main characters in unexpected ways. It all culminates in a spectacular final act that I did not see coming and had me thirsting for more. You can lay the success of the film entirely at the feet of director Dan Trachtenberg's authorship and the screenplay of writer Micho Robert Rutter. Predator, Killer of Killers is truly a unicorn among a field of jackasses. It's rare that fandom and authorship collide to create something truly great. It remains the exception rather than the rule. Yet that does not mean that we shouldn't be vigilant and on the lookout for these scenarios. The search is worthy of our time and attention. Or, to put it in more Predator-esque terms, let the hunt begin. Once again, I love your show, Rob, and all that you do. And that comes from Corey Van Castle Cook. Well, Corey, this is why I do this show, when I get letters like yours. What a great letter. And I agree with you 100%. Predator Killer of Killers surprised the hell out of me. I loved it. I thought it was great. I love the animation style. I love the storytelling. As a matter of fact, I don't understand. I know they made it for Hulu, but I wish they'd put that in a theater. And, of course, I think all of us wish that it would have been made in live action. But the price of creating something like that in live action made it, well, I would think very cost prohibitive. I also want to give a shout out to the quiet king of franchises, 20th Century Fox president Steve Asbell, who under his wise tutelage, I don't know if tutelage is the right word, but under his wise captaincy, I mean, he's done more to reinvigorate the franchises. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, Prey being one of them, Alien, Romulus. He's bringing these things back. And he's starting to do original movies. Ben David Grabinski's got a movie coming out from Fox. Pardon me. I said Fox. From 20th Century Studios. But Steve Asbell, he worked his way up from being an intern. He's probably the most story-minded and probably one of the great studio heads of the modern age. I mean, if I was going to make a movie at a studio, I'd want to go to 20th Century. I'd want to go to Amazon and talk to Sue Kroll and, of course, Courtney Valenti. So, filmmakers, there you go. Great letter, and I want to thank you for writing that. I thought that was a great letter. Let me just jump in. I've got a couple more letters to read that I think they're not as long, but they're good. Let's see. The Greyest Star says, going from Andor to the next live-action Star Wars project being Mando and Grogu is a violent tonal shift. Ugh. I know, but it's one we must endure. I mean, the funny thing is once you've seen Andor, you realize that Star Wars has grown up. And The Mandalorian and Grogu, it's fine, but it's just going to be a confection. So, yeah. The Dead Man has been a member for 25 months. Darren says, I appreciate the letter. My lord, that was long. It was. The Greyest Star asks, do you read physical books or a Kindle or on a Kindle reader? No, I don't have a Kindle. I don't have a reader. I buy all books. I love books. I love omnibuses. If I get comic stuff, there's books everywhere. Here, books and movies. And, yeah, books. I can't help it. I love books. You know what? I'll tell you something. I've tried reading on Kindles, and it's interesting because I read on screens all the time. I'm reading all day long. And I don't have problems reading articles and stuff, but, like, you know, if you have a book, you want to, like, pick it up. You know? Actually, there's not a book I can pick up that's in... Oh, okay. Here's one. There's a book right here. Here's a Max Allan Collins book. Actually, they sent me. The Neon Mirage. Here's a book. I wouldn't want to read this on a Kindle. You know, it's like a paradigm. It's like seeing a movie. You know what I like when you're reading a book? It's like ASMR. I love that sound. I love it. Everything about books is great. And you know what else? I like to take, like, long baths and just sit. I don't do this anymore because it's not good for you. But I used to take a bag, an old roommate called them super baths. And I would take a 2-liter bottle of Diet Coke, a bag of lime Tostitos, and a book. And I would go into the bathroom. You could hear me get out of the water a couple times to pee. And then I would read. But I could sit in a bath for 8 hours. I don't think I ever did it that long. 6 hours. And I could read an entire book. I wouldn't get out of the bathtub until the Tostitos, the Diet Coke, and the book were all finished. I haven't done that in a while. But yeah, make of that what you will. Darren says, Andor isn't perfect, but it's the best Star Wars since 1980 for me. I was enthralled through both seasons, and Luthen is now an all-time character. I totally agree. Apocalypse Cow. Oh, you know what? I should have brought up Baron Orgasm. Apocalypse Cow says, has a horror novel ever legitimately scared you as an adult? Also, any updates on Baron Orgaz? Here is, of course, Baron Orgaz. It was sent to me as a gift. This is a real book. It's from 1974. It's by Frank Luria, and it's another great novel of ancient evil let loose in the 20th century. I need to bring this up. I've been working on this model, so I haven't been doing it, but it explores. This is so funny. It explores a savage trinity of evil: Satanism, sex, and the sadomasochistic. Oh boy. I mean, what's not to love? And it's called Baron Orgaz. This is not a subtle book, and it was written in 1974, so I can't wait to delve into it. It's been a long time since I've read a lurid horror novel like that. So, there you go. I think, okay, I've caught up on the super chats, and let me just make sure if there's a tip or anything that I've missed. I don't want to do that. I don't want to miss anything. I think I've got everything. Actually, 1001 Johnny says, the struggle of Luke in The Last Jedi is very much the character arc of an old Buddhist. There is yin and yang, a binary, but there must be balance, and much of the Eastern romance is full of this dilemma. Yeah, I totally agree with you there, too. And I like it. So, okay, there, I think we're all caught up. Now I have another letter. As I said, the letters are not nearly as long as that one, so I hope you'll indulge me, because, you know, people are writing letters. And by the way, the link to write me a letter is right there, which you can just read. This one comes from Rob. Hey, Rob. I love having Max Collins. I love you having Max Collins on Let's Get Physical Media with Dieter. He wrote a series of books about a character called John Sand and his wife Stacy. Would you ask Max if he plans to write any more adventures of his married spy duo? Thanks, Rob Tucker. P.S. Happy birthday. You know what? I'll try, and if I remember, I will ask him on Sunday when he's on. I know I don't think he's sent me any of the John Sand books, so I don't know them. Or maybe he hasn't, I just haven't read them. But yes, I will definitely ask him about that. He probably will be tickled to death that you brought them up. Somrick writes, hi, Rob. I've been following you and your show, and John Campy is one, for quite some time. I just love the discussions about all things movies. I look out for the CinemaCon videos each year. The detailed descriptions are really enjoyable. I wanted to mention that in this year's CinemaCon, first footage from Project Hail Mary was showcased, and you loved it. In fact, you recommended the book because the film seemed a good adaptation. Well, after that video, I actually read the book, and to be honest, it is one of the most engaging it's one of the most engaging sci-fi pieces of fiction that I've read in a long, long time. Andy Weir just really captured the space adventure, and ooh boy, the dynamics between Ryland Grace and his space friend are really amazing, to say the least. I just wanted to thank you for recommending this awesome book, and if the whole film project remains faithful to the soul of this book, we are definitely in for an adventure. Warm regards, Somrick. Well, Somrick, let me tell you, I know I've been beating this drum, but when I get excited for something, I haven't seen anything that I can get really excited about. Is Project Hail Mary, like, would I put it in the same category as Peter Watt's Blind Sight? No. But the thing about Project Hail Mary is, it is very much a populist. Andy Weir wrote The Martian. And I would put Project Hail Mary, I love The Martian. I especially love the extended version of The Martian, where we meet more of the NASA team on Earth and the crew of their spaceship. I love The Martian. The Martian is, to me, it's the idea of it being Castaway meets Robinson Crusoe on Mars, meets a space rescue story. It is wildly entertaining. I love the cast. I love the actors. I mean, having Sean Bean talking about the meeting at Rivendell when they're talking about the One Ring. I mean, that's the most fourth wall breaking shit ever, and it works. And And when Glorfindel's brought up, I mean, come on. I love The Martian. Project Hail Mary is very much in the same vein as The Martian in terms of its tone. If they nail the tone, as a matter of fact, I think Project Hail Mary could take place in the same universe as The Martian. And they basically showed, I keep wanting to say 8 minutes. I honestly have no idea because I was so excited. The one thing I wanted to see most, and here I am telling the same story again, but I'm going to say it again because you brought it up. That was the thing I most wanted to see at CinemaCon. I did a whole show about this recently, but they showed only stuff from the first 6 chapters of Project Hail Mary, and they nailed it. They nailed it. The actress, I think she's German, who starred in Anatomy of a Fall. She plays, and I forget the character's name, the Ryland's friend on Earth. It's you bounce between when you're going between what's happening on Earth and with Ryland. Perfect casting. They did not, other than seeing his space friends, the exterior of his space friend's ship, which is, the design was perfect. Everything about the movie looks perfect. And Lord Miller nailed it. And I have to say that, you know, Ryan Gosling looks to, I'm a Ryan Gosling fan. He's the perfect guy to play Ryland. I think it's going to be, I do think it's going to win Best Picture at the Academy Awards in 2027. If the movie isn't pulled up to this year, but if it keeps its March release date, March 2026, I think, you know, in February or March for the Academy Awards in 2027, I think it's going to win. I think it's going to win. I've gone out that much on a limb. Now people say, well, Rob, Christopher Nolan's Odyssey is coming out. I know. And that's a big swing for Chris Nolan. It's a sword and sandal epic, you know, based on one of the most famous pieces of writing in the Western or ancient canon. I mean, the Odyssey, the Iliad, Odyssey. I mean, even though The Return, we saw kind of that variation on that story with Ralph Fiennes, which if you haven't seen The Return, check it out. There's a kid in it that got cast as Clayface, but watch The Return. Juliette Binoche and Ralph Fiennes. Check it out. I think that it's going to be a banger. It looked to me like they did not miss a step. It looked perfect, and that's after seeing 8 minutes. The whole thing could turn to shit, but maybe it won't. Now here's a good one. Here's a good letter. The final letter. This is from Jordan. Jordan Schoolcraft says, "Hi, Rob. I felt compelled to write to you after your most recent discussions of the Snyderverse films and their fans' hate toward the new Superman film." Uh-oh. Should I, put on a helmet? "I am a huge fan of what Zack Snyder did with the DCEU, and personally hate that we didn't get to see the full version completed, but I definitely don't associate myself with anyone who hates James Gunn or wants the new regime to fail. I will say, after seeing the trailers of the new Superman movie, I'm not very excited with the new direction. But I'll still give it a chance and definitely don't want it to fail, if only because I love superhero movies in general. As a fan of you and John Campea, I do listen intently to your discussions of all of this and appreciate your takes, but I think something is missing in your discourse. I represent a part of the fandom, I'm not sure how big or small, that is only upset about not getting to see Zack's vision completed. Speaking for that part of the fan base, it's nothing about James Gunn or the actors he hired, or the vision of the new universe. It's that even after getting Zack Snyder's Justice League, which, as you've said, is absolutely a win, we're still left with what could have been. How cool would it have been to have Man of Steel 2, Ben Affleck's solo Batman film, and just one more Justice League film that tied everything in a bow before they reboot? Hey, man, I'm right there with you. The thing that I miss most is seeing what Ben Affleck would have done with a movie. I mean, Deathstroke the Terminator against Batman. That would have been... That's such a genius idea for a movie that I can't even... I'm really sad about that. Really sad about that. If only we had those 3 films completed before they rebooted, and I and the fans that see it similarly would be happier today than we currently are watching them reboot DC. trust me, I understand how patched together the DCEU was over the years and how rebooting it was the best business decision for them and makes things more defined for the fans. I'm just sharing my thoughts because a lot of how this is portrayed makes it feel like Snyderverse fans are just angry for no reason. Well, there's a contingent of them that you have to wonder about. I won't ever get to see our favorite iteration of DC again, and it's not our fault, or in my opinion, even Zack Snyder's fault. Yes, his vision was dark, and as you say, there was not much joy in his films, but as a side note, I do want to ask you, was there any joy in the Batman film? Well, let me get to that. I'm not saying that I totally disagree with your overall sentiment, but why is it okay that a film is dark and everyone loves it, yet Zack's films are hated for being dark, and so they should move in a new direction? I understand if you're only speaking about Superman and how the world sees that character, but just something to think about when you look around at other films and shows that are darker in tone, and yet people of all ages watch them. Anyway, I hope this clears up some of the negativity around the current view of the new Superman film. Thanks, Jordan. Well, Jordan, first of all, great letter, and I do appreciate your measured response to all of that. Now, here's the thing, and I say this having just watched Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice and the first 2 hours of Zack Snyder's Justice League just the other day. 2 days ago, over the weekend. Now, I'll flat out say, I really love Man of Steel. And watching Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, it's epic. It's an epic film. And I love Justice League. But as I was watching Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, that movie there's so much stuff going on in it. I mean, we've got Batman's dream of apocalypse, and Flash shows up. You know, it's Lois. You're like, what? Where is this coming from? The movie, as much as I love watching it, and I love the feel of all of it. I love the way it's shot. I love the way everything about it, but it's not good. And it's not good because it's not enjoyable. I appreciate it as spectacle. I really enjoy. Look, my favorite scene in the Ultimate Edition is when Superman, when Clark comes home with the flowers and the groceries, and then he gets into the tub with Lois. And people have brought that up as a lighthearted moment, but it's not. Lois is clearly suffering PTSD from being almost killed and watching Jimmy Olsen murdered in front of her. That film is so, as much as I admire it and as much as I respect it, and as much as I fucking love the opening when Bruce Wayne runs in, he lands in Metropolis and he gets in and runs in drives through the city as everything's falling down around him and saves people and all that. That movie is so oppressively downbeat that when you're watching that film, and look, I think everything in it is cool, and I understand there is a spell that it captures. There is a, but it is so overbearing and it is so pummeling, and that final battle between Superman and Batman is so, like, when you watch it, I mean, it's beautifully staged and all that, but it's so, I just don't buy any of it. I'm watching it, it's gorgeous and everything is cool and I admire it all, but I look at this and I'm like, I don't buy, it's completely constructed. I don't buy anything that happens in it. I don't buy it. I just don't buy it. And I love watching it. I really was thoroughly entertained. I'm like, wow, this is a really incredible piece of work. But I'm watching this and I'm going, it's none of the plot really unfolds in any realistic manner for me. And as much as I'm looking at this, like, here's the thing. I understand that Superman's only been around because it takes place 18 months after Man of Steel. I do not believe that Batman, I do not believe that Clark Kent started work 18 months previously at the Daily Planet. And if Metropolis is across the bay, I do not believe for a second that at one time that Clark, just out of curiosity, would fly over to Gotham and see what he could find out about Batman. Why would he have to wait? I mean, are you kidding me? He has a super hearing. And it makes no sense to me at all. And I get it, because you want to see them meet for the first time. Give me a break. They're literally across the bay. And by the way, I hate that. I hate that Metropolis and Gotham are across the bay. That doesn't make any sense to me. That, like, you know, it's so silly. It just doesn't make a lick of sense. But that whole movie is so oppressive, and there's nothing in it. There is nothing in it that it's like being punched in the face for over 2 hours. The Ultimate Edition is almost 3 hours long. And don't get me wrong, I like all the scenes in it. But like the battle with everybody and the darkness of it all and the muted colors and there's not even a fun. There should have been, you know what that movie needed in it? It needed Bruce Wayne to go on a fucking date with Diana Prince, trying to figure out who the fuck she is. You know, because she's got the drop on him. And that my favorite scenes in the movie are between them, like when he goes to visit her, you know, and they talk. I'm like, that's when the movie becomes a movie instead of just a tableau. That film is just one tableau after another. And I kept waiting. I want to get into these characters, and I want to get into what they're thinking. I want to have like some moments of fun in those films. But here's the thing. No one would have made those movies the way Zack Snyder did, and they're clearly a singular vision. And if you watch Man of Steel and you watch Dawn of Justice and you watch Zack Snyder's Zack Snyder's Justice League, I guess the reason that I am happy with that is because, yeah, he could have told the story of defeating Darkseid or whatever, but it would have just been more of the same. We already know what it is. I mean, and the scenes, like, Ben Affleck's Batman, his Bruce Wayne is the best. Like, when he goes to find Aquaman, you know, and I'll give you $2,500 or $25,000 to talk to this man right now. It needed way more of that. You know, I wanted to see more of that. Everything is there's never a moment where anybody gets to breathe or anybody gets to have some real character interaction. There's very few scenes where people talk to each other, like as normal people, like having a conversation. You know, there's no mirth-filled moments there's a bit of it between Perry and Lois, you know, Coach Lois. But those films, I get why people, and I'll tell you why I think I have a theory about the spell those movies put on people. I think that there's something about, I mean, if you talk about, it's the same energy that people like Andrew Tate have tapped into. The vision of Superman, and to a certain extent Batman as well, they're the ultimate dudes. Like, they're the depiction of the ultimate males. You can look at that, and deep down in your like, I want to be Captain Kirk. I've always wanted to be William Shatner's Captain Kirk. That's my guy. That's my dude. I've wanted to be Captain Kirk since I was 5 years old. To a certain extent, maybe a little bit of James Bond. But James Bond can die on any mission. But it was Captain Kirk. He's my fictional character. He's my guy. But I understand, man, the visions, especially of Superman, the vision of Henry Cavill's Superman is he's the ultimate figure of maledom. And the thing about it is, he doesn't challenge. He's not overly emotional. He doesn't get into any kind of... The scenes that he has are very mythic. Even with, you know, sitting by... It's the S. It's not an S. It stands for hope. He never has a moment of human vulnerability. Not really. He doesn't even have a moment where he's acting like a real person, except when he, you know, even when he gets into the bathtub. That's kind of a weird thing to do. It's charming. I understand that. But it's like, if anything, Lois needed to be picked up out of the shower, not taken to bed, but flown to a different country, and they could have had a nice dinner in Paris or something. But no, I mean, she's suffering trauma, the way she's looked and curled up. But I get it. The people look at Henry Cavill in that movie, and that is the vision of who they wish they were. It is totally, they identify with him. The same way I identify with Captain Kirk. And and their entire identity is wrapped up like, these movies have the male image that I most want. I most want to be. I most want to emulate. I wish I was that guy. That's what it's all about. That's my theory. That and they wanted more of him because we only have those three things. But 3 movies, that's pretty good. Like, I'm like, you guys win. You get a win. I mean, we could have watched another Justice League movie or 2 Justice League movies and watched him defeat, but you already know how that's going to go. And I would I'll also say this. One of the things I think that the spin-offs, I consider Aquaman, Wonder Woman, and The Flash as being part of Zack Snyder's. I mean, he didn't direct them. The tones are wildly different. But that Aquaman movie, you had an octopus playing the drums, and you had dudes riding on sharks and armored sharks and seahorses. I mean, who would have ever thought when they cast Jason Momoa in the role of Aquaman that we would have got that movie? That movie, I loved it. When I saw it in the theater, I'm like, I loved it. Loved it, loved it, loved it. Now, would Zack Snyder have ever directed that Aquaman movie? No, it would have been a very different movie. But James Wan, he understood the assignment. He really did. So, but I do understand where everybody's coming from. Or at least, you know, I try to. Darth Plato says, Rob, you should do a stream from the bathtub. Yeah, I know. First of all, it's dangerous. Sound problems, too. And Apocalypse Kai never answered his question. Has a horror novel ever legitimately scared me? Not really. I will say this, though. When I read Pet Sematary the day it came out. I want to say the book came out in 83. I've told this story before, remember, because I tell all my stories. They all get old, right? But the thing about Pet Sematary was Stephen King was huge in the early 80s. Huge. He'd been made into a household name in the 70s. Huge in the 80s. But Pet Sematary was a book he wasn't going to publish. He notoriously said, it's a book that even scared me. I mean, dealing with the death of a child for a parent, and he wasn't going to publish it. He's like, no. And, of course, all of us Stephen King fans are going, oh, my God, when are we going to get Pet Sematary? When are we going to get it? By the way, it was years. They talked about this for years, you know. And I want to say, because 83, I want to say Christine came out in 83? And Cujo? Was Cujo earlier? But because you had Firestarter in 80. I can't remember everything. I used to remember this stuff. I used to know all this stuff, but it's to keep movie release dates. But I want to say that Pet Sematary did come out in 83. Pet Sematary, of all the books I've ever read, that was the book that scared me the most. There was something about it. I was reading it in my room with all the lights on, and my cat, her name was Happy, walked in, and I didn't know she was there. And like at one point, she got up on my bed and swatted me from behind, and it scared the shit out of me. And if you've read Pet Sematary, you know why a cat is scary. But that's the scariest book I ever read, was Pet Sematary. Normally books didn't scare me, but there was just something about that book. And part of it was the mystique that had been built up, the scariest book Stephen King ever wrote and stuff. And if you've only ever seen the movie, it's hard to talk about Stephen King now because his movies have been so ingrained in pop culture. But there was a time when there was only the book and not the movie. So, 1001 Johnny says, I'm holding back Dawn of Justice opinions. Well, you know, I've said it. I think the movie's very, very mean-spirited, and I haven't changed that. Tack says, Zack Snyder's Justice League is the Justice League movie 8-year-old me wanted. Totally. Badass heroes whose powers alienate them from humanity, but they still choose to be saviors. Flash time travel to save the team, and Superman embracing both his lineage always brings me to tears. Yeah, I mean, that's why I think I loved Zack Snyder's Justice League. I thought it was great. And to me, there's more joy in that movie because you've got, even though it's very oppressive and apocalyptic, it still has there's just more going on in it. You know, like I love the entire Flash sequence. Look, call me, I'm going to die on this hill. I like Ezra Miller as the Flash. Let's take away his trials, his travails, whatever. I like the Flash. I like the Flash. I do. I love Sasha Calle's Supergirl, and I love the Flash. Major Chai says, "Did you open the capsule toys yet?" No, and I apologize. When I was pulling out the stuff that was in the box. The capsule toys came out, and I put them on the table, and I forgot to put them back in this box. So I have not opened those yet. I will bring those down and open those on a stream. But yeah. So I will do that, I promise. Well, listen, on this note, I'm going to end the show. Thanks for writing letters. If you want to send me letters, look right down there. rmburnett1701@gmail.com. Write me a letter. I'll read it on the show. I'm just going to assume if you write me a letter, it's okay to read it on the show. But you can write me a letter. And if you don't want me to read it on the show, just say on the top of the letter, please don't read this on the show. I'm just going to assume that people send me letters that you want me to read it on the show. So, there you go. And on this note, I want to thank everybody for watching. By the way, this Friday is the 50th anniversary of the theatrical release of Jaws. Jaws turns 50 on Friday. And, I was going to go on a big trip, which I cannot go on now. But Friday is Jaws' birthday. So if you haven't seen Jaws, and who hasn't seen Jaws, but, have a Jaws party. I just saw that the Jaws wine bottles are at my supermarket. I think it's a Coppola wine, but there's different wine bottles. I got to pick one up. Got to get some. But Friday, big milestone moment. I can't believe Jaws at 50. Jesus, I was 8 when I saw it. Wow, that's some crazy ass shit. Anyway, Jaws at 50. On that note, I want to thank my moderating staff. I want to thank Tom Jr. Jackson. I want to thank Darth Plato. I want to thank everybody else who's here. Actually, 1001 Johnny says, no, Rob, bless your heart. I am holding back opinions. Well, 1001 Johnny, it's not like you to hold back opinions. Why did you do that? Anyway, so thanks everybody. And I want to thank everybody for generously supporting this channel via super chats, tips, and memberships. And I also want to thank everybody, for writing letters. People are really pouring their hearts out in these letters. And I want to thank you for that. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate that you take the time to actually put pen to paper or keyboard or fingers to keyboard and write them to me. It's a great honor, so thank you for that. And on that note, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear, and all you have to do is listen. And on that note, I would say to everyone, have a better night. And True Noir, available at truenoir.co. Go check it out. But remember, it's R-rated. I'm sorry it has bad language in it. But that's the way of the world. That is the way of the world.